Good morning. I'm Susan Williams. I'm the president of the Venango Chamber, and today is the first of our series Ask HR. We have with us today Pam Watkins from Watkins HR Strategy. Pam is a longtime friend, a member of the Chamber, and someone that really knows her stuff when it comes to human resources. She can keep us legal, but also keep us happy in our workplace. So welcome, Pam. I'm excited to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Susan.
Great. Well, I'm going to give Pam a minute to kind of introduce herself and maybe tell you about why we're here, why we think this is important, and then we'll get into discussing a couple of questions today.
Okay, thank you. So good morning. My nickname is the HR Geek. I have been doing human resource work my entire career, working primarily at the director level. I've done international work as well as across the United States. In all areas. So pretty much a generalist, everything from soup to nuts. And thinking about why this program might be important to people, I get calls pretty much weekly about questions that affect small businesses. And whether you have a small business or you're part of a large business, the concerns are pretty much the same. The rules, the federal law, the state law, the local may differ, but people are people. And when you're managing people, you have challenges. What my attempt to do is to answer any questions in kind of an anonymous format that might help other people in the future. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. And if you have questions, feel free to shoot them over. And we'll do what we can to answer them in a very brief time period this morning.
Yep. If you're doing that in the chat and want it to be anonymous, just direct it to Tessa. So she can either send me a quick text or we'll bring her in and she can let us know. But thank you, Pam. I agree that, so much of what we deal with in business, even across sizes of business, is just universal. We're all dealing with things. So I really appreciate your being willing to come here today. So I think the first question that we received is very universal. Any of us that have worked for any length of time find that there's a lot of personalities in the workplace. So what could an employer do legally if they have one individual that's creating a toxic work environment, disrupting the workplace?
Okay, so this question is something that comes up on a regular basis. We always have a bad actor in the workforce. Sometimes we have a group of them if it's a larger workforce. So what an employer can legally do if an individual is creating a toxic work environment is first to have a strong policy. What is the code of conduct? Even small employers benefit from an employee handbook, rules of engagement, so to speak. And there is a difference between, people use the phrase toxic work environment and hostile work environment kind of together, but there is an actual difference. So when I hear the words toxic work environment, what toxic means is it goes against the grain of having a healthy, emotionally happy and sound work environment. A hostile work environment is where people treat each other badly, right? And they're allowed to get away with it. Or it can be any type of harassment. It can be discrimination. So toxic, think of it in terms of it's people with negative energy. Maybe they're very negative about the workplace and they're constantly kind of stirring the pot, okay? But a hostile work environment is where you have discrimination, you have offensive behavior and language. You actually have people that are made to feel uncomfortable doing their job. It's bullying, it's intimidation or interference with work. Now, the difference between the two is important because if you have a toxic work environment, that doesn't typically lead to legal ramifications. But a hostile work environment needs to be dealt with swiftly, quickly, with a full investigation and punitive, some kind of counseling or warning or time off to the individual that's causing the problem. So what I can tell you is when I hear the terms toxic work environment, it is up to the management of the organization to set the tone for the culture that they want. 50 in a recent survey, this was in 2020, a survey that was conducted by SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, said 58% of the employees left due to their manager or supervisor or because of the workplace culture. So think about that. Pay didn't come up in that top category. So when I see all these people going crazy, offering all these signing bonuses and stuff, I get it. I get hiring is tough right now, unlike any market I've ever seen. But I think companies should be looking within what's going on. What problem are we trying to solve? So to kind of wrap that up, I'll leave you with this. Policy or a handbook is your best defense. 2, talking with people. If you have a problem with somebody, you've got to know how to have that difficult conversation or bring somebody in that can facilitate it and document it. If it's in the HR world, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Okay. So I constantly get calls from people that say, hey, Pam, I've got an employee that's causing trouble, or their performance is bad, or their attendance is terrible. They're always calling off. And I want to fire them. Like I've had it up to here and now I want to fire them. And I say, are they aware that you feel that this is a problem? Have you talked to them before? Have you followed any disciplinary steps? Because to go from in their file, it says, if you have a personnel file, it says they're okay. There's no warnings. There's nothing written. There's no documentation of a verbal. Now you want to fire them? That could be a problem. That could be a real problem. So I'll leave you with that.
That's terrific. Yeah, my takeaways really, have conversations, talk to your people about what those expectations are,
Right.
and that we should be training on culture. So we train on a lot of things. And I know you have a lot of resources available. We have a lot of resources available, have introduced a lot on, when we talk about customer service, one thing I will say is customer service isn't just outward facing. Customer service is how you treat each other. Your employees will probably be treating your customers as well as you're treating your employees, and they're treating each other. So great. Thank you for that help. So we've been through a couple of years and we've been dealing with changing policies. So I'm sure that there are people in the room and people that will listen to this recording after that say, well, we have great policies, but there was nothing in my policies about COVID.
Right.
Even if they had strong policies on time off, sick leave, doctor's appointments, COVID threw us for a real loop, because not only were there times when people felt that themselves they needed, but legally they kind of needed to be out of the office. So can you talk to us a little bit about what the time off pay looks like in the COVID environment right now, especially for small businesses of 10 or less employees?
Okay.
Should there be policy? Is it worth the time to put a policy in place when things are changing? What kind of guidance do you have for us?
Okay. So it's always good to have a policy, keeping in mind that any COVID policy is fluid and changing. If you remember when we started 2 years ago, it was, you have COVID, oh my gosh, you're out of the workforce for up to 21 days, right? So what's important is that there are 2 governing agencies looking at COVID. One is the CDC, obviously, and the other is OSHA. And OSHA has been charged federally with a responsibility to keep workplaces safe. So there are mandates in place that employers should do as a matter of good practice around COVID, even now, 2 years later. And because we don't know what's ahead, we're hearing that there might be a new strain coming out of China or whatever, and we don't know. And a couple of things. Right now, the most important thing I can tell people is, if you are looking for an answer to, do you have to pay employees for COVID time off? You do not. There is no federal reimbursement. There is no state reimbursement. You do not have to pay them. You can, however, offer them in accordance with your normal policy or practices. Let them take PTO if you have it, or sick time or vacation time. If you're an organization with more than 50 employees and you fall under FMLA, you may have to offer them family medical leave time if their absence becomes extended due to somebody being what they call a long hauler. Okay. The more important thing is the counting of the days. So what people get confused about is I take a COVID test today, and the CDC now says 5 days is what you have to be out. Okay. So
if you test positive.
If you test positive, or until you're asymptomatic. Now, let me give you the breakdown of that. If I've been vaccinated and I test positive today and I'm asymptomatic, I can come back to work as long as I'm masked. I have to be masked.
Immediately, you can come back immediately.
The recommendation is 3 days, but there's nobody that's standing at the door saying, If you have no symptoms, if you're asymptomatic and been vaxxed, people are pushing that 5 days or 3 day. Now, the CDC is still saying 5 days. And they're saying when you come back, you should be masked for a 10-day period. So, but the more important thing is the count of the days. So if I take a test today, that is day 0. That does not count as one of my days. And that's where people are getting in a little bit of trouble, because they're saying, well, you were tested on Thursday, so you need to be back on, in 5 days. But the day of the test is 0. It does not count as a day. So I do suggest that you have a policy of some sort, even though I worked with a small business. They had about 20 employees, and we had a COVID policy. Well, then it required full masking. Well, then when the restrictions came down, we went to, we had to change it. And so it's a fluid moving document, but it doesn't have to be a 15-page document. It can literally be a page covering. What OSHA wants you to do is a couple of things. They want to make sure that you educate people. Of course, they want to make sure you're encouraging vaccines. They want to make sure that you're tracking incidents in the workplace and that you're reducing the risk of exposure. And whether that is still maintaining some social distancing where possible, whether it's taking temperatures, doing like a little screening if you've had people in and out of the country, those kinds of things. So it's we're getting back kind of to business as usual, but not really.
Yeah.
Because
Pam, did you say you have a sample policy that you could
I do now
share with us?
I do, and I'd be happy to send it to you. You can send it out. And it's a template that was actually recommended by OSHA. And it's long, but you don't need something that long. I mean, it's written in a lot of OSHA type, OSHA type language. Yeah. So that's a little bit. So somebody also asked me, do I have to have them present a doctor's note to return to work if they've tested positive? No, you don't have to have a doctor's note unless that's your policy. If your policy says if you're missed more than 3 days, you must have a medical note to return to work, then yes, require it for COVID absences as well. But if you don't, then don't make them do it, because you don't want to make them do something that's not being done for other illnesses.
I was going to say consistency is important. So you might say, well, I trust this employee. We saw them, they're feeling fine. But remember that the next time that you need to use that policy might be someone that's a little more difficult or that it's uncomfortable. The more consistency you can use in your policies, they protect you against getting yourself into those uncomfortable situations, whether it's legally uncomfortable or just dealing with people.
Exactly. And then can you require someone to go home if they're showing signs of respiratory illness? The answer to that question is yes, absolutely. As an employer, if you feel that they're putting the rest of your workforce or your clients and customers and vendors at risk, you can ask them to go home until they're symptom-free or return with a negative test. So
I'm sure the employee question is, do you have to pay them? If I say, hey, you don't sound good, we need you to go home. Normal practice applies. No, you don't. Again, it's because the mandate is to protect your workforce and work and protect your clients if you're in a retail facing business. So EEOC has also weighed in on this, and they have provided an update that came out on March 30th. And what they're basically concerned with is discrimination because of COVID.
So it's not enough to have CDC and OSHA telling you what to do. Now you've got EEOC weighing in, and they want to make sure, again, that you're not violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. So if somebody is a long hauler, or they have, perhaps they can come back, but they're just really tired, or they're having some long-term reaction, you do have to provide an accommodation for them under the ADA. And again, you can't discriminate against them. And then the last piece of what they're concerned with is the caregivers. So if I have children, or if I have a sick mom or dad, and I'm their caregiver, and they have a serious case of COVID, even though it doesn't maybe qualify for FMLA because I work for a smaller company, the language they use is strongly encourage flexibility for the caregiver to provide care to the person with COVID. So again, to write somebody up for absences when you know they've been a caregiver for COVID would be not the right thing to do.
So Pam, I want you to hang on to the word flexibility. At work, I think we're going to have time, and I'm going to want to talk to you a little bit about that. But just to kind of wrap up the COVID question, so there's the time off when you're sick or suspected to be sick, but there's also the time off to be tested or to be immunized. Do you have any suggestions on what employers should do around, one, certainly encouraging staff to do so, but around time to do that? Should you tell people they do that on their own time? Should you pay them for time? Should you just give them access to time off? What do you think is the best practice?
So there's so many options right now. Our test sites are fairly open. It's not like you can't go on your off time, but if you feel that they're really sick and you want them to go right then, I would offer them to go and maybe pay them for half hour or something, because that's showing, again, that culture, that you care, that good faith. If these are people that, living paycheck to paycheck, they can't afford, and that's why they're coming to work sick. So a little bit of flexibility goes a long way. If somebody's sick or is suspected to be sick, offering, if you can, to let them work from home for a couple of days may be helpful. And, just being that compassionate employer or leader. But you can make them use some paid time and so forth. But right now, testing centers are open, vaccine sites are open. You shouldn't have any trouble going anytime to get that taken care of.
Great. I want to remind those who are watching the call here with us today live, if you have any questions or something that you'd like to pop in here, just give us some kind of indication, either throw something in the chat or let us know, and we'd let you ask a question as well. But I mentioned flexibility. So you and I have been working in the workplace a long time. So we've seen a dramatic change in flexibility in the workplace. I think that you could probably throw out a percentage of the workplaces that now offer what we would call a really flexible work environment. And there's still a few out that they're saying, nope, we've got a way we're going to do things and we're not going to do anything different.
Right.
I'm curious if you can just comment a little on how you feel about how that really impacts office culture. I know there's some pitfalls if you aren't careful about it, but what do you think employers should do about providing flexibility in the workplace?
Well, it's a slippery slope. Many employers want everybody's cheeks back in the seats. I mean, they like being able to walk down the hall and talk to somebody face to face, or maybe they feel that they're working harder or they can supervise them better. There's a lot of questions that I've seen in my HR professional groups that people are saying, how do you know they're really working? Like, how can we track that they're really on their computer working? For exempt staff, it's a little bit easier because you're paying them to do the job. You're not as concerned with the actual hours that they're working every day. With non-exempt staff, it does become a little bit trickier. I think that when the other thing again, tongue in cheek, the employer controls if they want them back or they want them to work hybrid. There is nothing wrong with an employer saying, everybody come back on this date. However, what I'm finding, even as I'm interviewing candidates for positions now, they're asking the candidates, and some of these are right out of, they're graduating from college in May. And one of the questions they ask is, can I do this as a hybrid position? So it's interesting that hybrid is now becoming more the norm, and people like it. People like it. And people have told me I get more done at home in my office than I do at work because there's no interruptions. Now, so I do think that their flexibility has to be considered. One thing to keep in mind is the Americans with Disabilities Act. If somebody has a disability and you've let them work from home during COVID, and now you ask them to come back and they say, because of my disability, I can't. Okay. And I'm going to use an example that actually came to me last week. Somebody had some very severe digestive issues, needing close access to a restroom. She was coming back to work full time. It was difficult for her. So she asked for an accommodation to be allowed to work from home because she had done it for a year and a half, so that she had close access to a restroom to accommodate her medical condition. Those are very real situations that employers are dealing with now. And again, you have the right as an employer to have them complete a request for disability accommodation form. You have a right to get a medical opinion. But at the end of the day, it comes down to that, again, that flexibility and culture that you're establishing.
And employee retention. So
yes,
that's
absolutely.
That's a real concern right now.
Absolutely.
For many employers. Yeah. Good. Well, that's I'm sure we could talk all day about how we manage that.
ADA is really difficult these days.
That's right. Well, Tessa did throw up the form for anyone that wants to throw a question out there. So we do have a little bit of time left before we'll kind of wrap up the formal part of today. Pam, can you maybe share another one of your commonly asked questions that you're navigating right now?
Well, I'm doing employee relations. When I get a call from an employer, it's usually, last week I had 2 calls. What I'm hearing right now is that the stress level in the workplace is very high in many workplaces, and employees are not getting along with each other. And they're not only being verbally abusive to each other, but in one case, an employer called me and the 2 employees were gonna duke it out. Like they literally were, it had come to that point where the frustration was so high and the employees were physically going to get into it. And so when I asked the employer, how long has this been going on? Well, they haven't liked each other for years. Okay, so they've been mean to each other for years. They've been giving jabs to each other for years. They've been sabotaging, and I use that word kind of loosely, but doing little things like passive aggressive things to each other for years. And then it just got to a unmanageable thing. So they call me and they're like, we should just fire both of them, right? And I said, well, okay, what have you done so far to help resolve this issue? Nothing. There's nothing documented. Nobody's been counseled. Nobody's been coached. Nobody's been on a performance improvement plan. Nobody's signed a last chance agreement. So you could fire them both, but you're going to pay unemployment compensation for both of them. And that's not helping you with your need to retain people. So again, doing the right things at the right time. When you know something's starting to fester, having those difficult conversations. And it's hard. I said to the employer this week, if I told you to go out and tell all of your employees they're getting a 10% raise, you'd race out to the floor and deliver that news with a megaphone. But when it comes to bringing somebody in for a tough counseling situation, people just don't know the words to say. And sometimes that's all it takes, is just getting them started and having that conversation. So what I told them to do is bring those employees in separately and start the investigation by help me understand why you did XYZ.
Do you think that there are times when it's in the best interest of the employer to bring someone either like you or a third party in to help with that? It's not every employer is really well suited. And of course,
Right.
probably more employers than not don't have a human resources professional.
Right.
So while we're encouraging people to talk, there probably are things that shouldn't be said, things that it's
Correct.
important for the employer to manage
Not
that
say,
conversation.
if they're not trained and if they don't have the temperament to have those difficult conversations, they need some coaching, they need some help, they should reach out, because many times that supervisor level can get a company in trouble. This was a couple weeks ago. I had a supervisor, an employee and a supervisor had a disagreement, and the employee said, if this something doesn't change, I'm going to quit. And the supervisor said, well, don't let the, how did it go? Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. And I'm like, oh, really? And so that's the supervisor. So could that be considered a hostile work environment? Gee, it depends on all the other things that happened leading up to that. So yeah, if you're
Words
in
matter.
yeah, it's probably worth spending, a little bit of money to avoid a messy legal situation. Yeah.
So a good
And
chance.
there are just great, also, I mean, there's people like me, but there's great legal minds. I work with an employment labor attorney out of Erie a lot. We go back and forth, and he's wonderful, smart. So when in doubt, get an opinion. Yeah.
Great. Well, I was going to say, this is a really good chance for us to kind of wrap up the formal part of our presentation, the recording, and remind everyone that Pam is a member. If you're listening, again, live or in the future, I would encourage you, as soon as you go off of this webinar, go to venangochamber.org, pull up our membership directory. It's where we have lots of experts across fields, and Pam's information there. Again, she is Watkins HR Strategy. She's generous in sharing information, and she would actually consult and help you with more advanced policies, training, any of that. And Pam is also very generous in sharing her connections. So I'm sure she would let you know where you might get legal resources. And also, Pam, if you would be willing to share with us, if you think there are any really good books or resources that people that just want to start digging into this themselves and trying to be better managers, really managing more healthy cultures in their workplace. I know we have some we could share. If Pam, if there's anything you're willing to share, she's got one.
So this is my reading. This is my light reading. It's called the Encyclopedia of Employment Law.
Yeah. Well, we're probably not going to buy that. We'll tell the library to get one on hand. So keep Pam's number handy, and all of you in business have friends that are in business too. So I would encourage them to take a look. We'll have this recording out on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing it out to all of you. So Pam, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate that you're willing to do this. And so as you can see, we have